You're listening to Convergence Church, OKC, teaching and equipping through Word and Spirit. Here's your host, Michael Rowntree.
Okay, well, a couple of weeks ago, I was driving to a prayer meeting, and I gave my dad a call, and it was just a check-in call. But he told me he had some sad news, and he said it was about Elaine Brothers. Now, Elaine, you guys don't know Elaine, but I grew up around Elaine. Elaine was the daughter of Tim Brothers, who was my dad's best friend. And so I grew up around Tim and his wife Jane and Paula and Elaine, the two daughters, and my brothers and the daughters, and we'd play and have fun together and all that. And the news was about Elaine. We can actually show a picture of her. This is Elaine. And Elaine had just a little bit about her. She had recently escaped a horribly abusive marriage. She was trying to rebuild her life. And so I'm talking to my dad, and he says, yeah, I was communicating with Jane, the mother, this week. And Jane said these words, Paul, Elaine is with God. And I was totally shocked. You can see from the picture, she's young. And of course, I asked the question that you naturally think of when a young person dies suddenly, how did it happen? And he said, I don't know. Jane didn't elaborate on it at all. My mom followed up with Jane later, and they talked on the phone, and they talked about everything except what actually caused it. Her silence leads us to believe it was something too painful to talk about, and we can kind of understand that. We can understand why a bereaved mother, if it was, say, by suicide or if it was by drugs, which it might have been, and we don't really know, we can understand why she's just not ready to go there in talking about it. But I was totally shocked. We understand it when it's a bereaved mother and the immediate aftermath, but it's actually not just her. Really, our whole culture is actually kind of afraid to talk about death. You just think about the euphemisms that we use to talk about death. Instead of saying that person just died, which sounds so harsh and brutal and real and close to home, we say what? We say they passed away. We say they went to a better place. We say we laid them to rest. And cultures around the world use this kind of language. It's like we whisper around death as if naming it makes it more real. Well, in today's passage, the one that we just stood up and read together, Solomon doesn't just whisper about death. He walks straight into the funeral home, and he points at a casket, and he says, wisdom is found here. And it's totally shocking, and it's kind of a wild thing. I mean, you heard the passage. It's like much of Ecclesiastes. He says some wild things. He's trying to shake us awake and to get our attention with some extreme language. He says wisdom is found in the house of mourning, and then he doubles over and goes even further, and he says, in fact, gladness of heart, joy is even found here. And today I'm going to try to explain some of the wildness of those kinds of statements and what is he really getting at. And this is part of a series that we've been in the book of Ecclesiastes called, What's the Point? And what's the point sounds cynical, and people at first glance think the book is cynical. I don't think it actually is. I think it's searching. And the question, what's the point, is meant to reflect that. And it's searching because even just a glance at our recent context, chapter 6, so we're in chapter 7 right now. In chapter 6, he talked about how even if everything's going your way and you're prosperous, you can sometimes feel hollow and empty. And then in today's passage, in chapter 7, he's going to flip the coin. He's going to go to the other side. He's going to say, in the most extreme of pain, you can actually find joy. And so what Solomon's doing is he's forcing us to reevaluate life's scorecard. And that's what I want you to do today, because what we typically do is we tally pleasure in the win column, and we tally pain in the loss column. But if we look at chapter 6 and 7 and we look at them back to back, and we see that pleasure isn't always victory and pain isn't always defeat, it forces you to ask the question, what's a true win? And a true win for Solomon is perspective, what he calls wisdom. And so today I'm calling this talk joy in the house of mourning, and you'll see why. And it's a joy that's rooted in the soil of wisdom. And so what I want to do in terms of approach today is I'm going to talk about 3 truths about wisdom. And those 3 truths are these. Number 1, there's wisdom's character. We're going to talk about wisdom's character. It faces harsh realities. Number 2, we're going to talk about wisdom's corruption. It can be twisted. And number 3, wisdom's completion. It surrenders to providence. So wisdom's character, its corruption, and its completion. And so we'll walk through those one by one, beginning with wisdom's character and its facing of harsh realities. And we'll begin by rereading a few of these opening verses. It says, a good name is better than precious ointment, in the day of death than the day of birth. It's better to go into the house of mourning than into the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth, or happiness, celebration. And so what he's going to do here is he's going to really focus on here the reality of death, and then he's going to move to the reality of failure. And so we'll start by talking about the reality of death. And really, all the verses in this section that I just read are about this. They're all about the reality of death, including the first half of the first verse when it says, a good name is better than precious ointment. The Hebrew word for name is shem, and the Hebrew word for ointment is shemen. And so what Solomon's doing is he's employing a word play to make a point. And the point he's making is this, that a wise and godly life leaves a lingering scent like ointment, or we would say perfume or cologne. You ever been around one of those people that sprays themselves with so much cologne they leave the room and you're still smelling them? My dad was like that. The lingering scent, it sticks around even after they leave the room. And Solomon's point is that when you have a good name, that is a good reputation. You've lived a full life, a wise life, a godly life. Then even when you leave the room, so to speak, even when you leave this earth, the scent, the aroma, the fragrance of your legacy still fills the air. That's the point that he's trying to make. So this first part actually is about death because it takes a lifetime to build such a reputation. And this explains why he'll make this crazy statement in verse 2 when he says it's better to go into the house of mourning than into the house of feasting. This is the end of mankind, the wise will lay it to heart. That is, the wise will dwell on this. Now first for clarification, Solomon is not anti-feasting. When he says it's better to go into the house of mourning than into the house of feasting, you can't read Ecclesiastes and come to that conclusion. There is no book in the Bible that exhorts you to eat, drink, and be merry more than the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon's big on feasting. He's big on celebration. So he's not anti that. He's anti-feasting as a means of escape. He's anti-feasting as a way of saying, I'm not going to think about hard things like death. I'm just going to eat, drink, and be merry. Like, you know, a number of years ago, they came up with the acronym YOLO. You ever heard this before? You only live once. That's what it stands for. And what it meant when young people used it, it was like, you only live once. So live a godless and wild life and do all the stuff you ever wanted to do because, hey, you only live once. Solomon kind of turns that on his head. He says, hey, YOLO's actually true. You only live once, so live a godly life. Leave behind a lingering aroma of a legacy. Because nobody, like, you know, when you die and they're speaking at your funeral, nobody's gonna be like, man, he could really put down the pints. It was amazing. No, they're gonna talk about the wisdom, the love, the sacrifices. And so Solomon is saying the wise lay it to heart. They dwell on the reality that life is short. They don't party as a means of escape. Yes, they drink good of God's goodness. They receive his blessings as a gift, but not as an escape. It's as a gift. Furthermore, wise people lay it to heart. They understand, you know what? I only do live once and I want it to make it count for God. I want to make it count for eternity. And so I'm going to live for him. The wise person enters the house of mourning because it's the one place that he can't lie to himself. It's the one place where he can't lie to himself about the reality of mortality. And this leads us into verse 3, where we have this incredible irony where he says, it's by sadness of face that the heart is made glad. Now, contextually, sadness of face is talking about the house of mourning. It's talking about the funeral home. And he's saying that makes you glad. And you're kind of like, wait, what? I'm not glad when I go to the house of mourning. Like, funerals don't make me happy. They make me shed tears. So what's he talking about? Well, first of all, what he's not talking about. He's not saying death is inherently good. He's going to argue against that later in chapter 9. He says a living dog is better than a dead lion. No, life is inherently superior. So when he says for instance, in verse 1, the day of death is better than the day of birth, what he's trying to say is legacy is better than potential. You have to wait until the end, until the fragrance has taken its time to spread throughout the room, to spread throughout the world. A life's full measure isn't realized until the end. So he's not saying death is inherently better. No, he's saying we need to rethink life's scorecard. And life's scorecard is measured fully at the end after we die. And whether we lived a wise life or a godless life. So now coming back to verse 3, when it says that a sadness of face leads to gladness of heart, the reason is when you think about the reality that you will die. And there's a French existentialist philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, who said that when we think about death, we always think about it in the third person, like that person died. But he says it's not until you realize it in the first person that it starts to shatter your illusions. I will die. And once you really let that truth sink in, what it does is it causes you to rearrange your priorities. This is how it leads to joy. When you contemplate your death, it forces you to rearrange your priorities. You're not living like there are 150 quarters in the game. You're living like there are 4 quarters, and actually you don't know when you're going to be taken out of the game. 4 quarters or less. You're not living like, it's like Moses prays in Psalm 90, where he says, what does he say? Teach us, O Lord, to number our days, that we might gain a heart of wisdom. Whenever you rearrange your priorities because you realize your mortality is real, this actually leads to a deeper joy and a deeper gladness. Why? Because the happiest people aren't the ones chasing squirrels. The happiest people are the ones who organize their lives around their values. So is that you? Is your life organized around your values? Or is it full of fluff? Because even if you know conceptually that you're going to die, and probably everybody in this room knows conceptually that you're going to die, if you start to internalize it and personalize it and know that I will die, it causes you to remove the fluff that you're not interested in. What are your days and your weeks and your years filled with? Are you living like this life is short? Solomon's point is that contemplating death helps you live a full life. Earlier I talked about Elaine, the daughter of Tim Brothers, my dad's best friend. Well, there's more to that story. So Tim, the father of Elaine, Tim's actually been gone for 27 years. So I called him my dad's best friend, but Tim was 50 when he died. And it happened real quickly. He got cancer, and he was gone quickly. And Tim, I remember growing up around him, he was one of those really unique, he just had a very unique personality. And he just was one of those people he was who he was. He didn't care what anybody thought. And people loved that about him. He was one of those people who seemed like he had a dozen best friends. Like probably everybody would have said they were Tim Brothers' best friend. I mean, my dad really was. I think he was number one. No, they really were close. They talked every week for decades until Tim passed. But when Tim died 27 years ago, these dozen best friends, or whatever the number was, these close friends, at the end of the funeral, they said, let's get together around this time in a year. Let's all get together and let's honor Tim's life. Let's reflect on that and let's just enjoy one another's friendship. Because, they weren't retired yet. They were still in the midst of kind of their career success and building life and all of that. And the death of their close friend at age 50 caused them to say, I want to rearrange my priorities. I want to prioritize really enjoying life with close friends because I just lost one. So I want to really prioritize that. And so they did that. And their first year, they went to Green, Texas. Have anyone here ever been to Green, Texas before? If you're from Texas, you know Green, Texas. Grune. It's famous for the Green Music Hall. It's in the Central Texas Hill Country. It's real pretty on the Guadalupe River. And they sat on this big wraparound porch and rocking chairs, just reminiscing on Tim's life and enjoying one another. And they enjoyed it so much that they started meeting every single year. In fact, because of that first experience on the porch in Green, Texas, they started calling themselves the Porch People. So they've been gathering every year for 27 years since Tim passed away. Actually, I want to show you guys a picture of them. This was the most recent. My dad is the one taking the picture, so he's not in it. My mom's the dark-haired in the bottom right. And so this is the most recent picture of the Porch People. And interestingly, it was actually at this gathering, because it was just a few weeks ago. It was at this gathering when my dad texted Jane, the mother. And he said, Jane, we missed you this year. I wish you were here. And that's when she said, I wish I could be there too. I was at the memorial service for Elaine. Elaine is with God. And I just think it's wild that these people's friendship, the depth of it, was forged by death, rearranging their priorities, forcing them to say, I want to make the most of this precious and fragile life while we have it. And they had these years of making the most of it. And then here, right in the middle of it, they're once again reminded of how fragile it is. And that's what Solomon is driving home here. He's driving home, if you forget how short life is, you lose how precious it is. And then you surround your life with frenetic activity and fluff. And what Solomon is saying, don't do that. Organize it around your deepest values, your deepest priorities, better, God's deepest values. Make them your own so that your life when you're gone becomes an aroma that fills the world, that people remember the love and the sacrifice and the goodness and the godliness and the kindness that you showed them, not how much you could put down. Nobody cares about that. YOLO means live for God. Use your life for God. Make it count. And I'll tell you, it's even more fragile. This was taken a few weeks ago. That woman in the bottom left there, second one up, I grew up around her too, her husband Dale and Portia. Portia passed away on Thursday night, died in her sleep. It's fragile. It's short. They just spent time laughing with her. It's fragile. It's short. You will die. There is a time, there is a place, there is a setting, there is a context, there is a manner in which it will happen. It will happen. And the wise lay it to heart. It's precious. Make the most of it. Wisdom faces harsh realities. The reality of death forces us to rearrange our priorities. How might God call you this very morning to rearrange your priorities? The second reality the second reality the wisdom faces is the reality of failure. The reality of failure. I'm chuckling because I think some people dread failure more than death. You can do it more than once. The reality of failure, verses 5 and 6 address this in the context of receiving rebuke. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. So in the same way we saw the fool trying to escape reality. I don't want to think about death. I don't want to think about death. I just want to party, YOLO, YOLO. Once again, we see the fool escaping here through song, through laughter. I don't want to hear no rebuke. I just want to hear happy thoughts and happy words. That's the fool. And so the fool's continuing his way of escape. but better is the rebuke of a wise than to hear the song of fools. Now, again, just like I said earlier, there's a place for feasting, and it's good, and Solomon's big on that. And there's a place for laughter, and there's a place for songs. I mean, Solomon in Ecclesiastes 3 says there's a time to laugh, and there's a time to dance. There's a time for these things, but the fool is once again doing it as a means of escape. He doesn't want to hear hard words, and his happiness is superficial. It burns out like kindling under a fire, and his laughter grates the ears of the wise, like the sound of crackling thorns in fire, or as we might say today, like fingernails on a chalkboard. When the fool laughs at, it's like somebody laughs at their high, quote, body count or whatever, and is just making jokes about their godless living. When a wise person hears it, they go, ugh, they cringe. But what does the wise person delight in? The wise person actually delights in correction. What is grating to the ears of the fool is music to the ears of the wise. Proverbs 9, verse 8, it says, "Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you." By this definition, are you wise? When somebody says, "Hey, I have a hard conversation. I want to share some tough feedback for you," are you like, "Yes, I'm looking forward to this"? Wise people do. Wise people want to improve. They want to grow through even difficult feedback. Now, I've mentioned before that I was mentored by Jack Deere. Jack had mastered the art of the rebuke. He had gathered a group of young men. There were maybe 8 of us or so, and it was for some discipleship. We met in the early morning, and I remember he said, "All right, guys, how you doing?" And first guy says, "Fine." Then the second guy, "Fine." Like, we got through 8 people, and amazingly, everyone was fine. And afterward, Jack said, that's a bunch of, hogwash, or whatever word he used. It's absolutely not true. So he comes back and says, "How are you really doing?" He starts going around, and everyone's like, "Well, I'm not doing so well." And they start talking about their pain. It becomes a much longer meeting, and it gets to me, and I share some deep pain that I'm walking through, and then I finish it by cracking a joke. And everybody starts laughing. And Jack says, "Michael, that doesn't seem funny at all. It sounds tremendously painful. I think this might be a pattern in your life of masking pain with humor." Yeah, it was. And I did receive that. And that began a journey of discovering, that's a pattern. See, laughter's not bad. Humor's not bad. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to sing. There's a time to dance. It's good, but it's not good as a means of escape. Wisdom is willing to stare death and failure in the face. By that definition, are you wise? Are you willing to stare it in the face? The joy of Ecclesiastes is not a sugar-coated joy. It's a slow-grown joy in tear-soaked ground. Now we'll shift here with Solomon as we're going to move into the next verses. He's going to shift from wisdom's character, where we saw it faces harsh realities, to wisdom's corruption. Wisdom can be twisted. Even the wise can lose their footing. It's not as like you reach this state of like, now I'm wise. Now I don't have to pay attention anymore. No, pay attention all the more. Even wisdom is vulnerable, and it's vulnerable to twisting, to corruption, to warping of the human heart. And there are 3 forces that warp the human heart in this section. It's kind of back to back to back, pretty quick. The first one is money, the second one is anger, and the third is nostalgia. Money, anger, and nostalgia can threaten to twist the wisdom once you have it. So let's talk about money first, and it'll be especially focused here on the abuse of money in verse 7. Verse 7. Verse 7 says, "Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart." So here, when he says oppression, this is a word that can be translated as extortion. And so extortion means forcing somebody, usually through threat or fear, to give you something valuable, usually money. Given that the context of the second half of the verse is about bribes, this is probably talking about some kind of financial extortion. But either way, it's abuse of power, probably financial power to harm somebody else. And so on the first half of the verse, he talks about when wise people suffer this. By the way, wise people can suffer this. You can be living a godly life, going hard after Jesus. You can be walking in integrity, and you can suffer financial extortion. You can suffer financial abuse and oppression. It can happen. And what happens is the wise can begin to lay it to heart, and it begins, I'm using the phrase in a different way. The wise can begin to internalize that, and what happens is if you don't forgive and if you don't respond in the right way, it can actually turn into bitterness. I'm thinking of somebody who gave, somebody I know who gave $40,000 to a church because the church was going to spend it on a big daycare facility that was going to reach the community and all of this, and come to find out the pastors were lining their pockets with it instead. Daycare never got built. And this person, after that moment, it's like he became more obsessed with money than anyone I've ever seen. Here he makes this incredible, generous sacrifice, and he couldn't stop talking about money, making more money. And what happened was he had started out in this wise place, in this generous place, but he suffered. He suffered financial abuse, and that bitterness over it went into his heart, and he actually became, instead of a generous person, a greedy person. A wise person became a fool. But it also goes the other way. It's not just in financial abuse that we suffer, it's in financial abuse that we might commit. The bribe corrupts the heart. Wisdom can be lost either way. It can be lost because of the bitterness that festers because you've suffered it, but it can also be lost because you're actually the one committing the injustice. The allure of wealth gets to your heart. It can happen either way. And so Solomon's warning about the dangers of wealth, but characteristically, he doesn't just warn about the dangers of wealth. He also talks about the blessings of it. And Solomon does this throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, but we're going to zoom down a few verses because after he talks about anger and nostalgia, he's going to return to the theme of money in verses 11 to 12. So let's read those. It says, "Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it." So what he's saying here is that first of all, money can be a blessing if it's governed by wisdom. If it's not governed by wisdom, it's not a blessing at all. It ends up being a curse to lots of people. But if governed by wisdom, it can be a blessing. And when it is a blessing, both wealth and wisdom have a similarity, and the similarity is this: both protect. Both wisdom and wealth protect, if the wealth is practiced wisely. The wealth protects you. It protects you, for one, if if some tragedy strikes and you lose your bed, or you're not going to lose your bed because, well, you have some money to help take care of you. And then here he talks about inheritance. It's a protection that extends even to future generations. It's an advantage to those who see the sun. It's a protection of money that he's talking about, but there's also a protection that comes from wisdom, and the protection that comes from wisdom surpasses the protection that comes from money. The protection that comes from wisdom is that it says it preserves the life of him who has it. In other words, it doesn't just guard your body, it guards your heart whenever you have wisdom. So again, Solomon is consistently talking about, it's like these verses, money's not all bad. There's some dangers to be aware of, but there are also some blessings to be aware of. So at the end of the day, operate by wisdom so that if you are blessed with money, you can enjoy the fullness of that blessing. And I like the balance that Solomon brings to the table. And I think it's a balance that the American church needs to hear, because in the American church, we tend to stray onto one side or the other. On one side, you have the prosperity gospel that baptizes greed and glorifies wealth through Bible verses taken outside of context. I know some people in this room have been hurt by the prosperity gospel, but on the other side, you have a poverty gospel that actually glorifies poverty, sometimes glorifies hyper-frugality, baptizes financial anxiety, and I don't think that's good either. And so we actually want to recognize that there are dangers, And there are limitations with wealth. And I think sometimes Christians can be judgmental toward wealthy people. Like, you got all that, why didn't you give everything away? You know, it's just like, well, you don't know how much they have given away. We should not judge. It is the blessing of the Lord that brings wealth, and he adds no trouble to it. Proverbs 10:22. It's the blessing of the Lord. But let us operate by wisdom, because then it won't be very much of a blessing. And so that's the point. We want to hold these in tension. So the first corrupting force here is money. The second corrupting force is anger. Anger. And this is going to continue a theme that he started with where he's going to say the end is better than the beginning. Just like he said earlier, the day of death is better than the day of birth, which again was not glorifying death as inherently better. It was only saying you know the quality of the life lived after it's been lived. That's what he's saying. He's saying that legacy is better than potential. Now he's going to carry some of those specific principles about the end being better than the beginning. Now he's going to apply that to specifically anger here. Verse 8, better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Now, notice here the contrast in verse 8. Between the proud in spirit and the patient in spirit. He puts these two in contrast, and it teaches us something about people with a hot temper. Hot-tempered people are proud. Hot-tempered people are proud. They're trying to hold on to control that God alone has. So whenever that person lashes out against a child or against a spouse or against an in-law or against a friend or against whoever it is, whenever they're lashing out, it's like they tremble at the thought of not being in control, and they try to force control on other people, but who's really the only one in control? God is. And so they're using their rage to make themselves into a god. Rageaholics form an entire universe that orbits around me, and my demands. And this passage, and we'll see this more as we go, is so much about who has control, about surrendering to God who is in control. That's why the not hot-tempered person, the patient person, actually springs from humility, saying, I'm not in control, so I'm not going to rage over people that I can't control anyway. I'm just going to be patient with it and gentle with it and kind with it. Now, as we keep reading in verse 9, we learn some more about this proud rageaholic. It says, anger lodges in the hearts of fools. Now, first of all, remember, he's trying to teach us, like, hey, I taught you how to have wisdom over here in these first handful of verses where you're going to face the harsh realities of life, that you're going to die, that you're going to fail. These are part of life. But once you gain wisdom from this, don't let go of it because of financial abuse committed against you or by you. Don't let that happen with money. Now he's saying, don't turn into a fool because of rage. Rage, anger, that lodges in the heart of fools. Now you might be familiar with the verse that says, be angry and do not sin. Anger by itself is not sinful. In fact, it's healthy to channel your anger. It's a God-given emotion to channel your anger in healthy and holy ways, not lashing out, but channeled in healthy and holy ways. The way you know that your anger has entered the sin zone, according to this verse, is when it kindles quickly and lodges long-term. When it kindles quickly and lodges long-term. In fact, these two ideas are related because here's the thing. I'm going to call rage hot anger. Hot anger is just old anger that's been triggered. Hot anger is old anger that's been triggered. I mean, all kinds of psychologists and people have studied this kind of thing. Anger is a physical energy. This is why whenever you get really mad, you want to punch a wall, which is super productive. You have an energy that just comes over you. That's why you want to channel it in healthy ways, because if you stuff it and you put it down, that anger becomes old anger lodged in your heart. You can think of it as a pool of kerosene inside of your heart. And all it takes is one little match. Boom. And that's what happens. That's why you explode. That's why that rage is so disproportionate. It's not actually the person who cut you off in traffic that you're so enraged at. It's the dad who left you. Or it's the mom who didn't raise you right. or it's the employer who didn't give you that promotion, or it's the God who didn't write your story the way you thought he should have. And so what happens is you have that old anger that sits and sits and sits and waits for a teeny tiny trigger. And whenever you rage, you're just unleashing that old anger. And when old anger lodges in your heart, hot anger explodes from it. And the wise person becomes a fool. There's a good book on that by John Lee called Facing the Fire. I read that a long time ago to help me overcome some of my anger. And so now we have money, anger. The third corrupting force of the wisdom that we want to so tightly guard is nostalgia. Nostalgia. Nostalgia isn't just thinking fondly of the past, it's aching for the past, for the good old days. And the thing is, it's not actually all bad. Just like money can be good, but also bad, and anger can be good, but also bad, nostalgia can be good, but also bad. Nostalgia can be good, like Psalm 42:4, where the psalmist is reminiscing upon times of corporate worship and joy and celebration, and he uses that to stir his soul to place his hope in God, rather than letting himself get despondent and despairing over it. So nostalgia can be good, but Solomon's warning about nostalgia being bad in verse 10. Verse 10 says, "Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom." He's continuing that theme. "It is not from wisdom that you ask this." You know that nostalgia has gone bad if it's holding your joy hostage to the good old days. You know your nostalgia has gone bad if it holds your joy hostage to the good old days. It tells you the lie that the best days are just behind me. And why is that a lie? The reason it's a lie is that the good old days were never actually as good as you're telling yourself that they are. You look back at old photo albums and you see all the smiling faces, you forget the tears. Your mind edits them out. You feel this sense of nostalgia. You forget the exhaustion. You forget the stress. You forget the pain that you were walking through. The good old days ends up being a lie most of the time. And the truth is this. The truth is that your past was painful, your present is painful, and your future is painful. But there is also truth in this. Your past was pleasurable. Your present is pleasurable. Your future is pleasurable. Yes, there are some seasons and a back and forth, or some more than others, but also in all seasons, there's a mixture in both. And what Solomon is trying to warn us is, hey, wisdom doesn't romanticize the past, nor does it idealize the future. Wisdom finds joy in the moment God gives. Because if you don't find joy today, you will not find it tomorrow. You have a choice today. Are you going to find it today? Are you going to reminisce on the good old days? They're just never coming back. No, don't give in to that kind of despondency. And so wisdom's character, it faces reality. Wisdom's corruption, it gets twisted by these forces like money, anger, and nostalgia. But now we come to wisdom's completion. Wisdom's completion. What I mean by this is the point where wisdom reaches its fullest expression. And the final couple of verses, wisdom's completion is that it surrenders to providence. Oh, and providence, when I use that word, I'm talking about God's sovereign ordering and arrangement of all things. I'm talking about his grand master plan that includes good things and bad things and whole, like hurtful things and pleasurable things. Like it includes all of it. He's over all. Like it's not like, man, I planned all that and then I guess the devil just kind of beat me out here. No, he's over all. He's over all. And if the devil does some stuff, well, he got permission to do it. God is sovereign over all. He's providential, but he actually works all things for our good. And so all that fits into the word providence. So wisdom surrenders to providence. Let's read the verses 13 and 14. It says, "Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. In the day of adversity, consider, God has made the one as well as the other." Goodbye, prosperity gospel. Why has he done it? So that man may not find out anything that will be after him. So whenever it talks about God making, or about who can make straight what God has made crooked, he's not talking about morally crooked here. When he says straight, that's parallel to the day of prosperity. And when he says crooked, that's parallel to the day of adversity. Both he calls a work of God, which God has made. So the reason I say that is that crooked and straight contextually are not moral categories of evil and righteousness. They're experiential categories. He's talking about seasons of comfort and seasons of hardship. And he's saying God made all the seasons, which agrees with what he said in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 earlier. And we can all understand why a good God would make prosperous seasons. But then the question is, why would a good God make hard seasons? Why would he create seasons of affliction? What's going on here? And there are a few ways of answering this. And there's also a sense in which we just have to say there's just mystery in all of this. But insofar as the Bible reveals it, we'll start with the broad brush stroke. The broad brush stroke is God actually created us for exclusively prosperous, abundant, wonderful, happy, joy-filled, laughter-filled, feasting, awesome seasons. That's what he made us for. That's what the Garden of Eden was about. That's God's heart. You want to see God's heart? Look at Eden. That's what he made us for. The hardship we suffer is because humanity said, I don't want all that. I want to be God. Like we talked about earlier with the rage-aholic. In fact, all of these things that threaten to warp the heart, they really all come down to control. We use money to try to control. We use anger to try to control. Nostalgia is more like we've kind of realized we can't control and bring the good days back, and so we grow despondent, but they're all kind of at the core rooted in control. And behind it all is a God who said, okay, you want control? You want to be God? You want to master your future, or you think you do? I'll let you have your way. And mankind sinned, and ever since then, all those happy days became a mixture. I think it's important to say that because we need to understand God's heart. God's heart is for your prospering and abundance. It really is. That's why he created it the way he did. So that's the broad brush stroke. But then Solomon's going to get real specific here in verse 14. He's going to add another layer. Why is this work of God? Why does he make some things crooked and straight? And why does he make a day of adversity and prosperity? Why does he do both? He's going to specifically say in verse 14, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. In other words, he's reminding us that we're not in control. You know, we could have had our nice, predictable God who's just like, oh, okay, cool. If you put in output A, you always get input A, you always get output B. Life is super predictable, and it's going to be just this ever-increasing prosperity. And he could have done that. But you know who you would have thought was in control if he did it that way? What these seasons do is they remind us you are as in control as you are in control of the seasons. Like, hey, it's getting cold outside. You going to change that? You can't control the seasons of life. You can't control prosperity, seasons of prosperity versus adversity. And mankind lies to himself and says, I created my prosperity. Who gave you the power to get that prosperity? At the end of the day, God is in charge. God is behind it all. And wisdom surrenders to those seasons. It doesn't resist them. It doesn't put on a bikini in a blizzard. It cooperates with the season. And you say, well, practically then, how do I surrender to this? And Solomon gives us advice there. He says, in the day of prosperity, be joyful. In other words, drink up the blessings. When you're living in those good times, drink it up. Enjoy. Now, and when he says rejoice in it, rejoice in those days of prosperity, he's not saying don't rejoice ever any other time, because we know throughout the rest of his book, joy is something we choose today always. But he's going to say, hey, whenever the spigot of heaven is open and you're just in one of those seasons that just seems extraordinarily blessed, really, really enjoy it. That's half the equation. But what do you do in times of adversity? Twice Solomon says the word consider, which is his way of saying reflect. If in the good times you're going to drink up of the blessing of God as gifts from his hand, in the hard times you're going to drink up the wisdom from God as also gifts from his hand. We need both, and most of the wisdom that you've gleaned in your life has come through pain, not prosperity. And so Solomon is saying, consider. He's made one as well as the other. Don't rage at him. Don't shake your fist at heaven. Surrender to him and say, I'm going to make the most of this. I'm not going to waste my pain. And I'm going to stop tallying my scorecard on the basis of pleasure and pain as wins and losses. I'm going to make the most of every bit of it. I'm going to make the most of prosperous seasons and enjoy blessings as gifts from God. And I will make the most of adversity and drink deep of his wisdom. That's what he's saying. And that's how you surrender to providence, to cooperate with the seasons he gives. And that's exactly what Jesus models for us. It's what Jesus models for us. If you think about Jesus' earthly life, what we know about him and his ministry, he was kind of renowned to be a party animal. Jesus liked to have a good time. He's a friend of sinners, and he's feasting and drinking and celebrating. And his disciples aren't fasting like the Pharisees' disciples. Or, why aren't your disciples fasting? Well, they're going to fast when I'm gone, but while the bridegroom's with them, they're not going to fast. In other words, what he's saying, your wedding day is not the day to fast. It's not a good day for it. Well, that's something better than the wedding days here. The bridegroom, the King of heaven, God, the second person of the Trinity, has taken on human flesh, and he's dwelling amongst mankind. This is a time for celebrating. Let's enjoy. Let's drink deep of God's blessing. Let's have a good time. Jesus modeled it in a season of celebration. But also when hard times came, he considered. He reflected. Hebrews 5:8 says that Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. He didn't waste his pain. He learned from his pain. When he suffered, he reflected, and he gleaned God's wisdom as a result of it. It's wild. The second person of the Trinity is omniscient, has all wisdom, but when he added humanity to his deity, he grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. And insofar as his humanity is concerned, he grew in that wisdom, especially through suffering that culminated at the cross, which embodies what surrender really looks like. Because at the cross, Jesus said, God, if there's any other way to atone for sin, if there's any other way to undo death, let me go that way. I don't want to die like this. And there was no other way. And Jesus said, not my will, but yours be done. And he cooperated with the sovereign season of God, trusting that God would make everything beautiful in its time. And 3 days after he was crucified, God did. And God did that for Jesus as a model of what he'll do for you through the power of resurrection, turning your worst losses into eternal wins. Romans 8:28 says he promises to redeem all of our pain. And the greatest work of God is not the day of prosperity or the day of adversity. The greatest work of God is the day of redemption, which comes through Jesus Christ. And because of that redemption, where Jesus paid for our sins and then he rose from the dead, because of that redemption, the euphemisms about death are actually kind of true. They're actually kind of true. We actually do go to a better place when we die. And we actually do, if we know Jesus, spend eternity with God. And that brings us to an eternal lens to place over Ecclesiastes chapter 7. If you don't know Jesus, this life is the best it ever gets. But if you do know Jesus, this life is the worst it ever gets. If you know Jesus, because of the power of redemption and resurrection, no matter how bad it gets, the best is always yet to come.